The first meeting is really a get-to-know-you meeting. We're going to sit down. Typically, the meeting will last about an hour. We're having a conversation. My job is to ask them some questions about where they are, what some of their goals are, what some of the key objectives they have in meeting with me, where they are to this point, and really what brought them in to see me. And now I'm at the point in my career where I have a lot of people that are dependent upon me to provide them with all the guidance and all the advice that we do on a day-to-day basis.
You spend your working years trying to build up your assets, trying to build up pension credits at your job, trying to grow your nest egg so that you can one day retire when you can't work or don't want to work anymore. And that's a period followed by phase two, which is retirement. And your priorities in these two phases are very different, but many times we see people don't make that shift and they still act like they're in phase one when they really should be acting like they're in phase two.
We're going to talk to you about what we commonly refer to as the second half of the game. And what I mean by that is you're working your entire life towards retirement, and I'm assuming that most of you are, at that age where you're starting to consider some of your options as you move into retirement. And as you do that, you're moving from what we call the accumulation phase of your life, where you're accumulating your assets. Maybe you're participating in your company's 401k, maybe you're contributing to an IRA account or a Roth IRA account or some type of retirement vehicle. And now, as you retire, you're transitioning into the distribution phase, or the part where you're going to need income in retirement. So we're going to talk about some different ways to do that with an emphasis on Social Security.
Hi, and welcome to Financially Speaking with Jeff Bush. Today, Jeff, we're going to be talking about assessing the risks of retirement. In other words, what are those things that people need to be aware of as they approach retirement or live in their retirement? Where are the risks? How do you address them? That's I guess our topic for today, and it's a big topic.
Yeah. Well, hello, Barry. Welcome to the show. It's great to be here once again here in the PCTV studios. We're going to talk about risk in retirement, and there's a lot of risk in retirement, and sometimes folks may not think about some of the risks that you're faced with when you're approaching retirement. But the first risk that I want to talk about is longevity risk, because longevity risk sort of plays into a lot of the different risks that you have in retirement. And the pure fact of the matter is that people are living longer. So if you retire at age 65, for example, you can expect, on average, to live another 21 more years. So in fact, I think we have we have a longevity, or I should say a life expectancy chart that we just showed up here on the screen. So if you're 65, you can expect to live another 21 years. So the significance about this chart is if you retire at 65, you got 21 years of life expectancy. You retire at 55, you got 30 years of life expectancy. So you got 10 more years for things to go wrong.
Well, not only that, I guess, because if you retire at 65, then on average, you'll live 21 years. Well, that's great if you're average. But obviously, by definition, everybody's not average. So some of us at 65 might be living to 90 or 95, and some of us at 65 might only be living for 10 or 15 years. So I guess it's a change in thinking, isn't it, about as you approach retirement? Because when we think of the risks, when we're younger, and the first thing you think of when you think of risks oftentimes is insurance. Well, you're insuring against a premature death. Now you're talking about the risk of a greater life expectancy, let's say, than you budgeted for.
Yeah, it's the flip side. It's the flip side of premature death. It's longevity. It's living too long. It's longevity. And of course, baby boomers are going to live longer than any other generation in our history. So that's something in our practice that we really have to assess. So longevity risk is something that we really take into account with a lot of the strategies that we put into play, because we're looking at, maybe producing guaranteed income for a lifetime and joint lifetime, life of a husband and a wife and that kind of thing. So it really comes into play with a lot of different things.
Yeah, I know when we think about income that we can't outlive, obviously the Social Security comes to mind, because that's one income that you can't outlive. I guess in effect it's kind of like a lifetime annuity that you decide when you're going to start collecting it, and that income is something. It's kind of a base of income for your life, and you don't have to worry with that. Whether if you live to be 95 or 100, it's still going to keep paying you.
Well, that's true. If you look at and of course when we talk about retirement income, we commonly refer to the three-legged stool. And I think we have a chart where we can put the three-legged stool up there. Okay, so we've got Social Security, as you just mentioned, which you're going to get for life, and you're going to get cost of living. Then you have a pension, which some people may or may not get in retirement, some type of pension. That's generally fixed for life. And then you have your retirement savings, and that's really the wild card, is how you're going to rely on your retirement savings.
I guess especially when we realize that more and more people are retiring without really one of the legs of the stool in place, because many people these days retire with absolutely no pension.
That's right.
And that makes a big challenge of how you're going to manage the Social Security to get the most out of that, and how you're going to manage those retirement savings to get the most out of that. And most of us aren't trained to do that, to manage that money. So I know the system of management that you use is asset cycle portfolio that basically is engineered so that whatever the three legs of the stool that you have and any other sources of income, savings, IRAs, 401ks, they all kind of work together to maximize the income and stretch the income as long as possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, an asset cycle portfolio, that's probably a subject for another show, but basically it's in its simplest form, it's asset allocation, where we're taking assets and we're putting them into different asset classes, and we're really addressing other kinds of risk in retirement, such as investment risk and the risk of the stock market crashing and that kind of thing.
And particularly, we know the stock market periodically is going to have corrections, may have serious corrections. Problem is we don't know when they're going to happen. If it happens to be, I know we were talking to a client the other day who retired just before the market tanked, and unfortunately, we hadn't set him up yet with the asset cycle, and he was really hammered, and he's never really recovered from that. He's not having the kind of retirement that he hoped to have. There's some other risks that we face. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, well, out of that three-legged stool, again, maybe the pensions aren't there for many people. Is Social Security going to be there? Is that a risk that Social Security, that program may not be there for people the way they want?
Well, we call that entitlement risk. Entitlement risk. So entitlement risk is the risk that these government programs, Medicare in particular, and Social Security, aren't going to be there in the form that they are now. And of course, that's always anytime you're relying on some sort of a program to give you your retirement income, there is some risk there. And of course, recently the Social Security system has gotten a lot of publicity because of the fact that they're beginning to be underfunded, and how's the government going to meet all these obligations? That when you couple Social Security and Medicare, it's the biggest obligation that our government has. Mm-hmm. So how are they going to meet that obligation in the future? As baby boomers begin to retire and tap into this system, how's the government going to respond to meeting that obligation?
Yeah, my understanding is that there's 50 million baby boomers that are going to turn 65 over a period of about 18, 19 years, obviously starting with the end of World War II. and running up into the mid 60s.
You're
That's
talking
a
about
lot.
when they were born.
Yeah, born in the, yeah. I'm sorry, I apologize. Yeah,
Yeah.
born just after the war. You talk about pent-up demand. There was pent-up demand when the GIs came home.
Yeah.
And babies were born, and that spurred this tremendous
Well,
population growth.
there's about 10,000 baby boomers that retire every day.
I picture 10,000 people in diapers lining up at the Social Security office wanting their money and whining about it or
Yeah.
crying.
But it is putting a demand on the system because there's more and more people that are getting Social Security and fewer people that are working. And of course, we get back, a lot of these risks that we're going to talk about today are intertwined. Like because when you talk about longevity risk, well, that means, the people that are living too long, well, if they're living too long, that means they're probably going to be requiring extra medical attention, which puts extra demand on the Medicare system.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of issues. There's not only issues that you're facing in retirement yourself, but there's a lot of broader ramifications, even some social issues here that this country's faced with. So, but again, if we go back to the three-legged stool concept there, the more that you have in the way of Social Security and pension and some of these fixed programs, the better off you're going to be. Because if we let's say you lose Social Security, the system just goes completely broke. Well, you still have your pension and you still have your retirement savings. Just like if you lose your pension, you still have Social Security and your retirement savings.
Well, if you think about it, the idea of people just losing their Social Security, if that happens, we're going to have bigger problems
Sure.
than you can
Sure,
imagine.
but the point
Yeah.
is that you're diversifying here,
Yeah.
and it's a way of managing risk.
Yeah, and if you have when you look at again that three-legged stool, the stronger each leg is. If one leg gets a little wobbly, the other legs kind of pick it up, and that kind of makes sense for people. What are some of the other risks that we face? I mean, first of all, I don't want us to give the impression that we think Social Security is going to go bust. I don't think that's. I don't know if you agree, but I don't think the Social Security Administration is going to go bust. I think what we're more likely to see is adjustments in the benefits for the people that are paying into those benefits now, the younger people.
It's just a risk, just like everything else is a risk. It's like you face risk every morning when you wake up. But what are some of the other risks? Well, we have what we call excess withdrawal risk. Excess withdrawal risk. Well, that means you're spending, quite simply, that means you're spending your money too fast.
Mm-hmm. You're spending your money faster than it can be replenished with some type of gains or interest or whatever. Yeah.
So if you're drawing down assets too quickly, and you really undermine your retirement plan when you do that. So, and that's where a financial plan comes into play. Because once you have a roadmap for retirement put into place, then you pretty much know what you can spend, and you can avoid that pitfall of taking excess withdrawals.
And just an observation in our practice, we see some of our clients, and we scratch our heads and say, you know how much your budget is for what you're going to be able to pull from these accounts, and we look at it every quarter, every 6 months or whatever, but we keep running over. We're drawing excess, and oftentimes it's not because the people of that age, people in their 60s and 70s, are spenders. Oftentimes they're trying to help their families, and they feel obligated sometimes to help their kids, and the kids don't mind leaning on mom and dad. But that's something you have to be careful about that, because if you do help the kids too much and you run out of money, are those kids going to be in a position to help you? Well, they've been relying on you. They're all for a lot of years, and so that's something we you have to really look at and say, okay, does this make sense? Is this good for all the parties for us to help?
Sure.
And can we really afford it, or should we say, okay, we have to kind of draw a line in the sand once in a while?
Well, and again, as I was saying, all these risks are sort of intertwined, and we go back to our asset cycle portfolio concept, and that is that if you have your assets strategically placed in retirement and you know where your income is coming from, you avoid that excess withdrawal risk. You're always going to have some money that's set aside for emergencies. And that's not what we're really talking about here. We're not talking
Or for
about
gifting. If you say, look, we want to do some giving.
Right.
We want to help the kids out. We feel like we have enough. We kind of set a budget and say, okay, well, this is money that we're going to give and be happy to give it, as they say, from a warm hand rather than a cold hand. But that is there aren't really do-overs when you get to this age. You have to do it right the first time, or it can be a slippery slope. Now, obviously, the biggest risk that I think the first risk, let's say, that comes to mind for most people, is the risk of the stock market, or just the economic markets, if you will. Talk a little bit about that.
Well,
Jeff.
the way that is addressed in our practice is you don't put short-term money in the stock market. So if you're taking stock market risk, you should be prepared to have that money invested a minimum of 10 years. If you have money invested in the stock market 10 years, and we have models that prove this, over time, you're going to make money. The risk gets smaller and smaller as you go further out the timeline. So if we're looking at investing over a 10-year period of time, even if you look at this lost decade, so to speak, of the early 2000s, even on that, even if you look at that 10-year period, you probably didn't make a whole lot of money, but at least you didn't lose some. If you for example, if you look at a period between, let's say, 2001 and 2011, you went through two pretty bad recessions, among two of the worst in our history. Even with that, you probably at least broke even. But if you look at most 10-year periods of history of the stock market, you're probably looking at at least high single-digit, perhaps even double-digit returns. So the stock market risk, the way I handle that is it's got to be long-term money. Your short-term investments have to be addressed with things that are either guaranteed or have much shorter durations.
So I guess the key there is what you said is that during say a 10-year period, the market rides up, the market rides down. Hopefully it ends up at the end, and maybe a little bit down or whatever. But the thing is, you weren't depending on that money to live on during that 10-year period. You had a 10-year, free look, if you will.
Well, that's where people get into trouble.
Yeah.
People get into trouble when they have money invested in the stock market and they are depending on that money to live off of. Mm-hmm. That's pure and simple. That's where that's where the problems are.
But I'm sorry, I apologize, but being in a low interest rate environment, which we're in, and being that the stock market is scary to many people. Many people, they don't care if it's a 20-year or 30-year window. The stock market just scares them. And so they look to their savings. They look to the bank. They look to the old-fashioned way of doing things, a savings account, a CD. What can they do? Their money's sitting there and it's making virtually nothing, and yet prices keep going up.
Well, that's risk too. You think about it. If you put all your money in the bank, where you're making a very low rate of interest, that's risk too. That's interest rate risk. And a lot of people don't think about that. Oh, I don't want to invest in the stock market. I'm going to put all my money in CDs, or I'm going to put all my money in the bank, and then you're not keeping pace with inflation. So I guess that's a combination of interest rate risk and inflation risk.
And market risk together.
Well, the market risk is the opposite problem, and that's where you don't want to put all your money in the stock market because of the volatility in the stock market. So this fundamentally comes back to asset allocation and the need to have a good, diverse portfolio where you have different types of investments, again, meeting different time frames. So your short-term money is invested in short-term guaranteed investments. That's where you do want to have money in bank CDs and money markets, maybe some guaranteed annuity accounts, something where there's relatively
Stable.
short-term volatility. Then you get it. Then when you get into maybe some 5 to 10 year time frames, that's where you look to bonds, because your bond rate is still relatively short, but you do have some volatility in there. But your bond portfolio is generally going to return better than what these cash instruments are going to return. So that's where you go with your bonds. And then you build your portfolio with your equities when you're going out 10 years plus.
So kind of the way you're describing it is not one portfolio, it's not one account, it's really a number of accounts with each one maybe having a job description.
In its most basic form, it's what we call asset allocation. And that is that you have, let's say you have $100,000, just to keep it a real small basic example. You take that $100,000, and if you can picture a pie chart, you have some invested in short-term guaranteed investments, and you have some invested in what I would call an intermediate term investment, like a bond. Maybe it's something that you're looking to tap into maybe in 5 to 10 years, and then beyond that, the 10-year money, part of that $100,000, maybe you put it, because you're not going to need it for 10 years, you put it in stock-like investments. Okay. Now, what we haven't addressed is, well, what happens if there's an emergency? That money you keep in cash as well.
Right. So
the asset allocation is what's really important. Barry, before we get too far here,
sure.
We have a white paper on this. So when I say a white paper, it's a report. It's a free report. So if you want to get a free report on retirement risk assessment, give us a call, send me an email. We have that information up on the screen. We'll get this report out to you. It's retirement risk assessment. It's a good thing to have. If you're planning retirement, you should be looking at some of the things that you're going to be faced with in retirement. There's a lot to think about when you're retiring, and the more planning that you're doing in retirement, generally the happier that you're going to be.
Well, I think it's imagine if you're during your working years, you work and you work, but you never know how much you're going to make in a week or how much you're going to make in a month. It just happens because there's forces beyond your control to decide, well, this week you're going to make $100, and next week you're going to make $500, and the week after that you're going to make $326. It'd be a pretty stressful way to live. I mean, how would you plan on paying your mortgage? How would you plan on paying your basic living expenses? So it sounds like what you really need to do as you approach retirement is think about, okay, I need a basic paycheck. The basic paycheck, which will cover the expenses we know with great certainty are going to be there. Well, those you don't want to have the income fluctuate month to month, because the expenses don't fluctuate. The expenses are there every month. So that's kind of you need that as a foundation. And I guess Social Security and a good financial plan on the retirement assets can make that happen.
Well, yeah, you have your Social Security, you have a pension, maybe, and then you want to design your retirement savings in such a way that part of that retirement savings should be set up to give you some guaranteed income, because you want certainty in retirement. The more certainty you have, and the more guarantees you have, the less all these risks that we're talking about today, the less susceptible you are to these risks.
You know, it really is a lot to ask of people who haven't been financial managers, haven't been students of the market, let's say. They're working at their job, they're raising their families, they're busy with life, and then they're handed a 401k or a 403b retirement account and shown the door and told, good luck, here, you manage this, you manage all these risks. And I think we haven't gotten through half the risks on the white paper just in today's program.
We haven't, and that's the evolution of the way retirement accounts are working. I mean, it used to be 30 years ago, most of these companies, large companies that you worked for, you got a pension, or what we call a defined benefit plan. And that's really changed to now where the vast majority of companies are offering defined contribution plans in the way of 401ks, etc. And you're right, because when you retire with a 401k, now what's happening is you're in essence responsible for your own retirement risk or your own investment risk. So managing that risk is very difficult for people, and that's why you need help, because there's ways that there's tools that are available that help you do this, that help you. There's a lot of wonderful tools out there that help you manage the risk that you're facing in retirement.
Great. Well, I guess the biggest issue people face is, it's how do you start? It's like what's the old story? How do you eat an elephant? You have to go one bite at a time. And this is kind of an elephant for people to. I imagine they're fairly daunted, but it's a great place to start. Is to take a look at your own personal risk profile, and you can use this white paper and see if you're handling these risks, if you're prepared for these risks, and if you are, great. If you're not, you can follow it up, and we'll be happy to consult with people and sit down with them and really show them, give them some tools to work with, and show them how they can turn their, let's say, their savings, their investments, their resources into an income stream that's going to carry them through a comfortable retirement and handle these risks one by one.
Right. Okay. So again, if you want to get this free report on retirement risk assessment, give us a call. Our number's up there on the screen. You can send us an email. We'd be happy to send that report out to you. A little bit about us, Barry. We have two offices. One right here in Pottstown, down on High Street. We're on the corner of High and Hanover in that great big brick building, up on the 4th floor, 152 East High Street. And then, of course, we have our main office down in Norristown on Boulevard of the Generals. Again, today's show, we talked about retirement risk assessment. We really only scratched the surface here and talked about some of the basic things that we're faced with, the risk that you're faced with in retirement. But I guess I'll close today's show by saying that the main thing that we want to drive home today is that in retirement you're probably going to live a long time, probably longer than you think. A 65-year-old person retiring is probably going to live another 20 years, 20 to 25 years, let's say. So it's important to address all these risks to make sure that you're living a happy and comfortable retirement. So on that note, we're going to sign off today and say it's great to be here again here on PCTV on Financially Speaking, and we look forward to doing another show.
Have a great day.